Okay, it's recording.
All right, this is an empathy call, empathy circle about the topic of patriarchy. Um, so some questions could include: Is patriarchy real? What is it? How do you feel about it? And there might be a few people joining us late, but it probably will just be the five of us. So we use an empathy circle format where, for those we all know, those of us who are here participated, but for anyone watching later, where one person at a time speaks to someone else and gets a 6-minute turn, and then the person listening reflects what they're hearing in pieces with pauses as necessary. And we will first, after this, we will introduce ourselves, and then we'll start doing that. They're like reflective listening rounds. And then about 7:45 or so, we will stop and do like a closing circle with feedback about how it went. Would anyone like to start by introducing yourself?
I'll start. My name's Jessica. I'm in Alameda, California, and I think it's an interesting topic, and I'd be happy to listen to other people's opinions.
Oh, did you want to mention
Oh, I'm more on the conservative side of political.
Yeah.
Classical liberal, conservative, libertarian, whatever you want to mix them all up together. I guess I'm.
Okay. Lauren, would you go next? I'm just calling it as I see the order on my screen.
Sure. How's the volume?
It's fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sounds.
Yeah, so I'm Lauren, and I'm in Chico, California. And as far as I understand it, I'm on the more progressive or liberal side of the political spectrum. And was there anything else, or was that it?
That's it.
Okay.
David?
Yeah, my name is David. I live in San Francisco, and for all intents and purposes, I identify as on the right.
All right, Edwin?
I'm Edwin Rutch in El Cerrito, which is near Berkeley, California, and I'm on the empathic side.
Okay, my name's Megan. I live in Northern California as well, and I, not really, I guess kind of more on the left, but kind of outside of the traditional schema as well. So since I suggested the topic for tonight, perhaps I can speak first, if anyone, unless someone else wants to. All right, I will speak to Jessica.
Okay.
All right. Who's keeping time? David, are you keeping time? Okay, I can kind of see what time it is now too. When you find it, you could just do 4 or 5 minutes instead of 6. So the impetus for choosing this topic tonight was that I saw this big conversation in this Facebook group I'm in about patriarchy, and how this guy was saying that he feels really hurt when he sees people talking about patriarchy all the time, because which in that group people do post about things related to patriarchy as well, although that's not like the main focus of the group. But a lot of women post about like painful experiences that they have with men in that group, and this guy was posting about how he feels really hurt about it. To him, it feels like when people talk about patriarchy, like they're just saying like men are bad and masculinity is bad. And I'm kind of bummed that there were so many people participating in that thread, and I'm kind of bummed that no one from that was in that thread is on the call tonight, I did, you know, let them know about it because I have a lot of like empathy and understanding for, you know, what he was saying. Like it makes sense to me. And I also have a lot of empathy and understanding for the experiences of the women in that group who post about painful experiences they have with men. So I would like it if we could talk like live about it, because to me that's more like connecting than a text-based thread. So I'll stop there because I know it's kind of a lot, but it was all like one piece. So
You came to this topic because one of the men on the Facebook group you're on, that you guys talk a lot about patriarchy, and he's very hurt about some of the conversations that a lot of women who've been hurt, who feel they've been hurt by patriarchy, he feels like they're just attacking men in general with that, and he doesn't feel like he should be the target of that anger, I guess, and that you had posted about this to try to get more people to participate, and you're kind of disappointed that people from that thread haven't responded.
yeah.
Anything?
Yeah, let me just see if there's more I want to say. Well, I think that patriarchy is both an oversimplified concept and a really important concept. I'll say more about that. It's oversimplified in the sense that it often, people talk about like the patriarchy as if there's like one social system of dominance by men that's like the same across time and space, like across different cultures, when really like all these different contexts are different and unique. And there's also spaces where what is called patriarchy like might not even really apply. So it's oversimplified in that way, but I think it's also an important one because even though it's oversimplified, there is like this shared experience that I think a lot of people can relate to when that's kind of summed up by the word patriarchy.
You feel like the concept of patriarchy is oversimplified, and across time and space, it's not that simple, I suppose, like people try to present it. And what was the last part you said? I'm sorry.
But that it's also like an important concept because I think a lot of people can relate to it as well. Like there are like similar experiences that people have in different contexts.
That it's an important concept because there are similar experiences that people have regarding patriarchy in a similar context.
Even in different contexts.
Different contexts.
Yeah. Okay, so I feel heard about that. So now it's your turn to choose who you want to talk to.
I'll talk to Edwin.
Okay, listening.
Okay, I feel like patriarchy, there's only 2 countries in the world right now that are notable that have absolute patriarchy. That would be Saudi Arabia and Iran, where women pretty much don't have very many rights. During the last Green Revolution in Iran, Neda Aga Sultan was out there demonstrating, and the Revolutionary Guard just shot her in the head and killed her. And I'm sure, and women get stoned in Saudi Arabia, I know that, for different things. And then I'm sure there are other states in the Middle East that are patriarchy. I don't know of any Western countries that are patriarchy. And then there's patriarchy on a personal level in families. Some of it might be voluntary, where the women like being in a patriarchy, the men like being in a patriarchy. Some of it might be people being rebellious against it because they're not happy in it. So I think it's kind of, it depends on what kind of patriarchy you're talking about, personal or political.
So really, for you, it depends on what kind of patriarchy you're talking about. Is it a political one, and you're seeing that maybe Saudi Arabia and Iran are sort of political patriarchies, and then there's families that have sort of a patriarchal structure, and the men maybe agree to it, and the women as well, and then also some people rebel against it.
Yeah, and I think there are some matriarchies also that, whether they're accidental or on purpose, where people are happy or they're not happy. I think it's just the way people are as human beings.
So there's also matriarchy that I guess you mean like in families, and so there's just like a variety of different structures.
Yes, that's about all I have to say right now.
Okay. I'll speak to David.
Okay.
Okay. I think when I understand patriarchy, it's just a form of authoritarianism, so power over, like how do you structure power? And so there's kind of like there's a lot of different ways of structuring power, and sort of at the core, maybe patriarchy is male, authoritarianism in a sense.
Okay, you said that when you think of the word patriarchy, you think of a more of a authoritarian system run by males. And what was that second part?
It's about power over, how we can, one person can have power over somebody else.
Yeah, and it's about power over someone else.
Yeah, and the alternative, I would say, is like an empathic. Ideally, it's sort of democratic or even more empathic, where each side is considered, and you have an integration of the different, people's different positions. You come out to mutual agreement. So that's moving towards the democratic, towards the culture, but I would call it culture of empathy. Is sort of an alternative to that sort of power over authoritarianism.
So you're saying that you actually believe in more of an empathetic, democratic approach, where it's not about one person, it's not about power over another, it's about mutual understanding and decision making.
Yeah. And I grew up in an evangelical family, which the evangelical, it can have a rather, so the male is kind of head of the household. So it does have a bit of that patriarchy aspect to it. So, things are so much more complicated. Like there's sort of this, sort of struggle for power even in those families, and it's hard to sometimes tell really who does have the power, even though there's sort of this explicit notion, that the woman has to follow the dictates, decision making of the man.
Okay, so you were talking about how you had more of a Christian evangelical type background, and that climate, usually it's pretty explicit about the man being in charge, yet observing it actually in play, especially in families, a lot of times it was questionable who, quote unquote, had the pants on, who
Or
wore
the power.
Yeah.
And then it was always a shifting power. It wasn't just like clearly, there was all kinds of other dynamics of, kind of ignoring each other, or, just there's so many different ways people try to grab power. And for me, the alternative would be like, a family empathy circle. Actually, what we're doing here, this is like sort of the beginning where everyone has a voice, kind of an equal voice to be heard. And so this is kind of the alternative, what we're doing here, I see.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, you're just reiterating your preference to more of a balanced, not power-based relationship with humans like the sympathy circle.
Yeah, it would be a power with. So, yeah, mutual power
Mutual power
with each other. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a shared kind of a shared.
you prefer the shared power
Yeah.
structure where everyone
Yeah.
has equal power.
Yeah. In that. Yeah, I feel heard.
Are you done?
I'm done. I fully heard. Yep.
All right. All right. I guess I'll talk to Lauren.
I'm listening.
Hey, Lauren.
Hey.
I'd like to first of all say that this is not my favorite subject. I'm going to try to be. Oh, we got a incoming. What should we do?
Pause.
Yeah, it's on pause
Yeah.
monitor.
Hi, Patricia. Welcome. Glad you could join. I want to check with you. Have you done one of these before? Have you done one of these empathy circles?
Me?
Yeah.
No.
Right. So we already have gotten started a little. What we're doing is just going around, and each person takes a turn. They pick someone to talk to, and then the next person, whoever they talk to, like reflects what they say. So like Edwin just spoke to David, and then David's speaking to Lauren now.
May I make a suggestion?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Just one person talks to another person, and they reiterate back, and for that person's turn, and then that person who's listened becomes the speaker and picks someone, and they repeat. And my suggestion would be her just sit back for a turn and kind of see it in action, see if she picks it up.
Yeah. Would you like to real quick introduce yourself though? Also, just so you know, we are recording the call so that other people can like learn from it. So would you like to introduce yourself and say like where you're from or where your political leaning?
Sure. My name is Patricia, and I'm from Phoenix, Arizona. And I've been studying nonviolent communication for like 4 years, and have gone to a retreat and do a little bit of activity here in Phoenix. But I don't know that I can stay on the whole time either. I thought I'd be able to just kind of watch.
That's fine.
So I don't want to disrupt. You guys just do whatever.
Yeah. So I will probably just go back to the rounds we were doing.
Okay.
And then maybe after there's a few more, if you're okay with it, someone might like choose you to be the person to reflect. But maybe you could just, like David said, just like watch for a while to see how it goes.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right, I'm gonna mute myself again so that David can keep going.
Hey, Edwin, are we going to keep the channel open? Is this going to happen again?
I just locked it.
Okay.
Nobody can join now.
This is cool. I'm just saying that I don't want to do this every 20 minutes, stop. All right, whatever. Anyway, it's my turn. I picked Lauren. Lauren, you still there?
Yes.
Okay, so the topic is patriarchy, and I was saying that I wasn't particularly fond of this topic for, I think, somewhat obvious reasons. But I guess the first thing I would bring up is something Edwin was talking about, is like, I guess it's about power, right? And how do you define power? I'll stop there.
So I heard you say that this is not one of your favorite topics, and that you think it might be obvious why. And referencing what Edwin was talking about, you said it's really comes down to being about power.
Okay. Yeah. And as far, I guess, patriarchy would be more like who's in charge. And I think in any situation, whether it be a family or a nation, whoever is in charge is going to naturally end up being the people who are able to gain that role. You know, usually if someone's in a position to get that people will follow them when they talk. You know, it's kind of hard to be a leader if no one does anything that you suggest. You know, so whoever's able to get that becomes the leader. And then as far as like what trend of gender they are, or sex, should I say, um, that's just, I mean, the proof's in the pudding, I think, you know, as far as that's concerned.
So you're saying that it's a question of who is in charge, and how that happens is by getting people to follow your suggestions or do what you say, and that otherwise there isn't going to be any leadership happening if people don't follow your lead. And in terms of sex, as far as who might be doing the leadership, how did you put it? It's kind of speaks for itself, or?
Yeah, it kind of speaks for itself, yes. Like, it's kind of hard to explain. It's like, it just kind of, whoever is able to do that does. I guess one would say, like, I don't dive too much in this topic, but I'm assuming there's people out there that probably think there's like a round table of men that just basically figure out how they can stay in power and how they can suppress any kind of women that might usurp them. But yeah, it's I don't think it's not that conscious. You know, I think there's I mean, it's kind of how things just kind of happen in a lot of ways.
So are you saying that it's not deliberate necessarily that there happen to be more men in positions of power, but that it's not a conspiracy of people plotting, of men plotting to withhold power from women, but it's just evolved? Is that what you mean?
Yeah. And to get in this topic, really, I mean, for it to not turn into the conspiratorial, I think the two questions that must be observed is, what is power, and what is the difference between men and women? You know, and those are very, very hard topics to talk about. It's very complicated, and I'm not an expert in any of those.
So you think that it's a pretty complicated topic and challenging to talk about, and part of it is even being clear what is meant by power and what is the difference between men and women. So to even define kind of the terminology to know what we're talking about.
Yeah, yeah, and like the way I kind of see the world, just like just the average, so to speak, the way I look at things in a very simplified form is that men rule the world and women rule the men who rule the world. You know, so like I said, you have to kind of ask, what is the nature of power? You know, who's actually in control? Or, you know, if you have people who are controlling things, then you have people who are controlling the people who are controlling things. This is, of course, you know, just a heterosexual kind of view of the world because I'm a heterosexual man. But yeah, like that's sort of how I think it's happened throughout history, from my understanding.
So it's when it comes to defining the situation, your observation is that men have mostly ruled the world throughout history, and then there's women who rule the men. So really, what are we talking about when it comes to power? You know, if there's people who control things and then other people who control them, possibly. And then you said that this is coming from your particular point of view as a heterosexual male. So you're just acknowledging the parameters of your view. Was there anything else?
That's about it, and I feel heard. It's your turn.
Okay. Mhm. Let's see. What if I talk to Edwin?
Okay, listening.
So I haven't really gathered my thoughts too much about this, but I definitely am aware of the issue of defining terms, knowing, are we all referencing the same thing when we talk about a concept? Because I have the impression that patriarchy is kind of a loaded concept, that it has a lot of implications for people and brings up a lot of opinions and feelings, but it may be about different assumptions behind the idea in question.
Mm-hmm. So for you, it's important you haven't thought a lot about it, or you haven't sort of clarified your thoughts on this, but you see the importance of being clear with definitions, because every concept, people sort of interpret it differently, and different things can come up for different people.
Yeah, it's harder to, I think, really get to what's important to people if we don't know exactly what we are referring to. So
yeah, if we don't know what we're referring to, it's hard to get to the real meaning that it has for people.
yes.
The deeper meaning.
Mm-hmm. And for more connection across differences, possibly, as well as connection across similarities when it comes to maybe joining resources. So it's helpful to know what the subject matter really is.
Mm-hmm. So to be able to, I guess, have shared understanding, connection, shared maybe collaboration, it's good to know kind of what we're talking about, so what we can agree on, sort of.
Yeah, I mean, for example, I have a loose definition currently, and this isn't something I've spent a lot of time with lately, but I think Mickey Kashtan has talked about patriarchy in terms of men knowing who their descendants are, and or trying to control female fertility by setting up social structures in order to do that. And once they started doing that, it has had a lot of mostly kind of oppressive results, I think, is the grasp I have of her definition.
Mm-hmm. So one of the definitions you're using is something from Mickey Kashtan, where she said men were controlling women's reproduction.
Yeah, to know where that they were the parents of the children.
So the motivation for controlling reproduction was to know that they were the parents, they were the father, or having control of that.
Yeah, and which has led to a lot of things like there's issues about honor related to whether a woman is pure, and all of the values that get piled onto it. The theory is it stems from wanting to know whose child it is, being able to control that.
Mm-hmm. So the understanding she has of kind of a foundation of patriarchy is being able to control or be aware of who the child is, if it's your offspring or not, and to be able to make sure that it is.
Yeah, and so I gather that she thinks that most of our domination systems fall under the umbrella of patriarchy. And I don't know if I agree with that because I haven't thought it through, but I'm worried that the term is actually distracting from the issues because it references men specifically, when I don't know if all of the problems are related to it being gendered.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, so you're not sure about some of about even using the term patriarchy because it's referencing men, and there might be sort of deeper issues that are really there, and we're maybe not getting to those. It's just kind of confusing the situation.
Yeah,
Maybe
or
putting men on the defensive or something like that. You didn't quite say that.
yeah, that would be an example of a problem with talking about it that way, when I'm not convinced that domineering or domination behavior is always linked to male positionality. And because I have that question, then I'm not fully comfortable with using patriarchy loosely as a term.
Mm-hmm. So it's like you're seeing domination behavior and you're not feeling comfortable with sort of saying all domination kind of happens through patriarchy. And
Yeah.
so I have some kind of questions about that, some skepticism maybe, or not sure.
Yeah, I'm always looking for nuance and capturing like all of my observations or experience of an issue. There's a term, curiarchy, that to me sounds like it's capturing more the idea of some groups ruling over others, kind of, or having more power, and so it's more intersectional. And I'm curious about that, exploring that more.
So there's a different approach, which is just that various different groups have power over other groups, and that might be a different way of looking at it. So you're curious about that way of looking at it, sort of based on intersectionality.
Yeah. I'm not aware how much more time I have. It feels like it's been a little while.
You tracking 1 minute, I think David said. Showing.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, but I am interested in acknowledging the effects of different power levels and structures and how it affects our relationships and our functioning in the world.
Yeah, so just wanting to acknowledge that the different power structures affect how we relate, and just wanting to kind of acknowledge that. And
yeah, and address the issues that it brings.
yeah, so look at the issues that come up around those powers dynamics.
Yeah, I think that's it.
Okay,
Feel
so you
heard.
feel fully heard. Okay,
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I'll speak to Jessica. You're muted.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard Mickey Kashtan talk about patriarchy, and I heard people object to it too, about it, kind of just saying all power is sort of male, sort of caused by males, or I don't know all the intricacies, but I do find that the word, like Lauren was saying, it has some problems for me. Just the term patriarchy, and I haven't found it terribly productive.
You're saying that you've heard Mickey, was that her name? Mickey?
Yeah.
Yeah, her talks about, or her ideas about patriarchy, and you feel like it's too restrictive, and you have a lot of problems with that word as a template to discuss power, kind of.
Yeah. So for me, it seems like kind of looking at a positive, in the positive, like where do we want to go? What is it that we're trying to create, instead of dwelling on sort of a problem, and having the direction be wanting to create a culture of empathy. And that means that everyone has a voice, and that there's sort of a dialogue where everyone is heard, and their concerns and values and needs are incorporated. Seems like a positive sort of direction exists. So like, how can we do that? So without, it is a way kind of forward.
So your focus would be more on creating sort of an empathy way forward, instead of just focusing on this one word, patriarchy, and how to solve problems.
Yeah. And I've noticed it's something, at least having been more on the political left, I've just seen how the political left seems to be very against things. So it's like against the patriarchy, against racism, against hate, against violence, against, it's just this whole thing of being against, and it kind of, I mean, there's no end to being against stuff, you know. So it just does not seem like an effective way forward, and I got a lot of stories about that.
So your experience with the political left is that they're mostly just against things, like against racism. Well, I don't know if you said that, but a whole bunch of
Yeah,
against.
it's a bunch against racism, against sexism, against the patriarchy. I mean, there's just so many. It's just like ongoing.
And it never ends, and you don't know how productive that sort of attitude or that sort of outlook in life can be.
Yeah, so it's like, how about, what are we for? Like, we're for, you know, empathy, mutual empathy, everybody's voice being heard, and that's already a huge problem. I mean, just even having that intention is just kind of to create that reality is, you know, it's a lot of struggle even doing that, you know. But at least it seems like we're kind of moving towards something sort of positive. And I think that's maybe what the person in that group was objecting to, is this talk about patriarchy. You know, he was feeling sort of defensive in that online group that inspired Megan to do this topic.
Yeah, so what people are for would be more productive, and to listen, to be empathetic, instead of just attacking each other about
And being against, yeah.
and being against, yeah.
Yeah.
And you think that's what Megan's the person in Megan's group was probably feeling so defensive about, like everybody was ganging up on him, kind of.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like, I guess it's like, how can we shift the exploration and the conversation? And the part I was saying is, even with the intention of being empathic and creating empathic dialogue and understanding for everyone, there's already so many challenges in that, you know, so many things to overcome. But it does seem like, you know, you can overcome something and move closer to that empathic connection and understanding and collaboration.
It's a struggle to create a place where people can be empathic to each other and listen to each other. And it's a lot of work to try to create that atmosphere, on your part anyway.
Yeah, and even if we all decide, hey, we want to create a culture of empathy, to actually do it is pretty hard. But just being against stuff, it just seems like it's a never ending, there's no end to it. I mean, there's no end to being against stuff.
Yeah, you feel like just being against stuff, there's just no end to it, and it doesn't really get any results.
Yeah, then people would be against your against.
Yeah, you're against your, it's just, yeah.
So yeah, it's anyway, that yeah, I feel heard. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I'll pick David. Well, patriarchy as a word is like kind of archaic to me. I mean, it probably belongs somewhere in the Middle Ages, like with the Queen Elizabeth. She wasn't a patriarch, but she sure cut off a lot of people's heads.
Sorry.
So I don't think it really helps people to be more cruel or more kind. I think when people have power, they have a tendency to be cruel. It doesn't matter if they're male or female. I mean, but if they're wise, they'll learn how to temper that. I think some of the rulers, both male and female, eventually learned how to temper that so they could keep their jobs and the goodwill of the people. Personally, in the families that I grew up in, like, it was hard to tell if it was a patriarchy or a matriarchy. There was a division of labor. Like, my grandmother taught school, my grandfather plowed the fields. They didn't hang out and talk a lot. They weren't, I don't think people did that back then, but they seemed to get along pretty well. Each went their own way in their chores, and she cooked the dinner. He went out and chopped wood, that type of stuff. So it seemed to work out. So
okay, so you brought up, like, you know, historically it didn't really matter if the ruler was well, first of all, you said that you think patriarchy is sort of a archaic term that kind of belongs in the Middle Ages, and that historically it doesn't matter what sex the leader was, they generally were ruthless, and usually the sign of a good leader is someone who tempered that, to be a better ruler, to you know get more goodwill from the people because they'd eventually be overthrown. I'm guessing. And then you mentioned your upbringing. I'm not sure if it was your parents or your grandparents you were
My
talking
grand,
about.
yeah.
Your grandparents, they're very sort of like this kind of traditional, mm, like family structure. Like your granddad went out and tamed the land, so to speak, and your grandmother kind of stayed at home and cooked, and I'm guessing took care of the kids and stuff, and
She was a
that they,
school teacher also.
and she
Yeah.
was also a school teacher, so they were both pretty busy in their duties, and they really didn't hang out and talk much, but for the most part, they seemed to get along.
Yes, that I feel heard.
Is that
I
all?
don't. Yeah, I don't have much else to say right now.
Okay. All right. So I guess I'll talk to Megan.
Okay, I'm listening.
Yeah, I do think patriarchy is kind of a archaic term, but I mean, I can see, I can kind of see it, like how, especially the modern woman, can look at the list of presidents and kind of be like, "What the hell is going on here?"
Okay, so you said that you agree that patriarchy is an archaic term, but that you can see how women in modern times might look at how all the presidents have been male and be upset about that, frustrated,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah, and especially after this very I'm not sure the word would be for the 2016 American election, but it did kind of turn into the woman versus the man, right? And Trump is he's Trump. He's not very feminine. And I don't think Hillary is either. But anyway, yeah, there was a lot of upset women at the result of that contest, because that was the first time a woman made it to the primaries.
Okay, so you're talking about how the 2016 elections kind of turned into this like man versus woman contest. And so you could see how women would be upset about that, or how people might see patriarchy in that, in Trump winning instead of Hillary Clinton. And you also said like because Trump doesn't really show any like traditionally qualities that are considered feminine, although you said you don't think Hillary Clinton really does either.
Yeah. So I forgot to start my timer. I'll calculate it. I got about 3 minutes. All right. So yeah, it's I think we, in a lot of ways, in a lot of different issues outside of just sex issues, I mean, we are kind of defined by like how historically humans have done things, and I think in modern times, due to technology, the industrial revolutions, it's been kind of a great equalizer. I think women, I mean, due to like birth control and stuff like that, women are less chained to the house, so it's kind of changed the dynamic of stuff. So I think we're all kind of figuring that out, So I don't think women should look at how our culture is shaped, because for thousands of years there's a reason for that, and it really wasn't. I mean, that was people basically just wanted to survive and reproduce and be successful, and generally that entailed men catering to their strengths, the women to theirs. But now everything's being equalized, and I'm not sure, you know, what people are not really sure where they stand anymore. I think.
Okay. You're talking about like birth control as this great equalizer, and how you think that because now of the access to birth control that society has changed from what used to be like women and men both playing to their own strengths, and that now we're still kind of trying to adapt and figure out what it means that there isn't this like difference so much anymore because of having birth control, and that we're kind of still figuring it out. Like it's a huge change.
Yeah. And so I try to limit how much I put myself in women's shoes, because I feel like that's impossible, because that's like a whole other universe. It's like me trying to pretend to know what it's like to be black or something. It's just that would be too much assuming. So I would think women may, especially those who are quote unquote against patriarchy, should not assume what it's like to be a man as well. So I think there's this great barrier of, even though we all live in a shared reality, it's very different depending on who you are. So that makes it hard to talk about these things, I think.
I hear you saying that you don't really try to imagine what it's like to be a woman because you feel like it's like you never would really be able to know anyway, and that it's just so different, and that so similarly you would like it if women do not assume what it's like to be men because they can't imagine what that's like.
And I think that's a great that's a great barrier when talking about things like this.
That it's a huge barrier to talking about patriarchy, sex, whatever,
Yeah.
that
And
people can't really know what it's like to be a different sex.
so I think I got about one more minute. All right. I haven't been taking the time very good this evening, but so as far as, you know, patriarchy or matriarchy, it's about who's in charge. And sometimes I don't think it's best. It's the best thing to be in charge. Like at a lot of my jobs, I had very little envy for my boss, because it didn't seem like even though they might have got paid more, that I would want to be in their position of dealing with people. I was more than happy just sort of working there. And I try not to let that hurt my esteem too much, about like I'm not the top dog, whatever. I'm just like, yeah, more power to you. You do that. I'll be over here, And I think a lot of women, from the women I've known and stuff, that they could be in charge if they want, but they're just like, why bother? As long as my needs are met. So I think it's a lot of times it's tactics on like what will keep you fulfilled. And I think there's been a lot of promotion of like self-empowerment for women, like they have something to prove to men, that they can be men and be just as powerful and as good as leaders as men, and are just as strong, or et cetera, et cetera. When I think,
I started keeping time. It's like way over 5. Just
I think we usually do 6, but
6. Okay,
but
it's
we have
about
a lot of
7,
people.
8 or so.
Okay, I'll stop.
Yeah, I'll just reflect that last part. I heard you saying that like a lot of the jobs that you've had, you did not envy your boss and you would not want their job even though they got paid more. You were happy to just kind of do whatever you were assigned to do and take it easy. And so being in a leadership position is not necessarily like an enjoyable thing. Like it could be really hard. And that you've known a lot of women personally who you think don't want to be in a leader or power position, that as long as their needs are met, they don't want that responsibility. And you think that a lot of women have maybe been encouraged or even pressured to take on leadership positions that maybe they don't even really want.
Because society is kind of pushing them to prove themselves, that they're men, and I just think we all have our strengths. And
Yeah.
that's the time. Hey, Edwin, could you start keeping time? Because I've been getting kind of absorbed in messing the time up.
Okay, I'll do that. I got a stopwatch here.
All right.
Okay, I'm gonna speak to Patricia, who told me that was okay. So, Patricia, will you listen and reflect? You're muted too, so you might want to unmute.
And we're doing 6 minutes now.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So I just had some notes of things I was thinking about. One way that one thing I want to bring up is like a way in which, so one of the questions was like, what is patriarchy? And one aspect I would say of what we could call patriarchy that to me is really relevant is the assumption that a male experience of the world is the default. And I think one of my favorite contributions from feminism is to point out that there's no such thing as a neutral subject, which is a kind of like a jargony academic way maybe of saying there's no such thing as a person without a specific perspective, but that a lot of social discourse like assumes that there is somehow like a neutral person, but then that neutral person is actually male. I'll pause there.
So one of the questions that you were noticing or writing down or both was, or that just came into your mind was, what is patriarchy? And one of the aspects of that that you're talking about is this aspect that that no one, or, and I might be getting this wrong, is no one is completely neutral. There's no neutral person, but that sometimes it might be assumed that the supposed neutral person is male. I don't know if I have that.
Yeah, like I'll just kind of expand on that. Like when Edwin was talking about like, oh, we should just focus on empathy instead of being against things. Like let's focus on what we want. A lot of times those, when people say things like that, it ends up being like a generic positive quality of like, oh, we need justice, or we need equality, or we need empathy, like these generic positive qualities end up defaulting to like certain like a person who is male, or has been treated as male in a society, is going to have a different idea of what that means than a person who is female. Like and I mean, that's not the only reason. Like there'll be a lot of other differences between them too, like just from personality and like culture and the family they're raised in. But as long as we have these categories in our society and think that men and women are different, then and as long as men and women are having like a different experience of reality, then a man's idea of what it means to have an empathic culture might be different than a woman's, like, or at least that's one thing that could make those ideas different. And when we don't acknowledge that, then it can just default to the perspective of whoever has control.
So you were reflecting on how that when we talk about wanting these positive qualities, or I mean, that was just an example you picked of what Edwin was talking about. But for example, they mean different things to different people, and one can't assume that they understand completely, because there's differences based on who the gender or the gender of the person. Is that kind of on track, or?
Yeah, I think it's it's a little hard to articulate, but thanks for reflecting that. I'll just share one more thing. I think I have another minute or two. I'm not sure. Can you hold up a finger, Edwin?
Yeah, 30 seconds.
Okay. Yeah, I'll just share that. I also think another thing that can be considered patriarchy is like, some people might consider patriarchy, or at least sexism, is like telling people what kind of characteristics they should have based on their sex. And like the person who had that thread that I was talking about, the Facebook post, part of what he was saying is like that he feels like he's kind of like a more soft, gentle person. And that's not like a traditional masculine quality, but that he doesn't think it should be considered masculine or feminine. And I agree with that, I guess. I want to say more, but my time is out, so I'll stop there.
So just to reflect on that last piece, you were just noticing that in the thread that was spoken about earlier, that the person was just saying how they thought that what is typically a female, what are typically referred to as female or feminine characteristics, such as gentleness and I forgot the other one, but that he was wishing that they didn't reflect any gender at all, that they could reflect either gender, and how you wish it was that way as well.
Yeah. Thank you. I know you'd said you might need to go around 8. Would you like to share something first, like pick someone and share something?
Sure. And I just want to say the only reason I have to go is I have an interview coming up, and I want to be able to kick butt on it. So let's see. So I think maybe Lauren, if you're able to or willing.
Yep, I'm listening.
Okay. Oh, great. I can see you. Okay. I have not investigated patriarchy, or I'm not well read on any of these things. But the topic interests me because, I mean, I wish I had a lot of really positive male role models in my life. Up until this point, I haven't. I've probably, in where I work, the person who was my father, other males in my life, different relationships, really tended to be there was a lot of power, and I felt I just felt very afraid of these people, and the way that they used that power. I'll stop there.
So you were saying that you haven't really read or researched this topic that much, that you have some general thoughts right now about, or it interests you because in part you haven't had a lot of positive male role models as much as you wish you might have, that most of the male figures in your life have had a lot of power, and you've felt afraid in those situations, or you associate fear with how they've used their power.
Yeah, thank you very much for hearing me. Yeah, so I feel that, or I don't feel, it's a thought. I think that I'm biased. I tend to have a hard time with males in authority. Probably any authority figure, but I don't know what I want to say. I just feel that I have a lot of growth. Like, I wish I would just move to a part of the country that was more liberal, and so I could experience equality more. And I know, but I work in a very conservative, male-dominated organization, and it's hard for me to, I feel really sad because I see them giving more chances to this kind of tall, and I know how sexist this sounds, to the tall jock type of employees, people with sports in their past, or people with 2 kids in a house, and like the stereotypical normal person. So I don't know, I just feel sad about that. And I feel sad that I'm biased. I really feel sad that I'm biased, and that I can't be, that I'm not more neutral. And I feel like I do a disservice to the males who are not like that.
So you're saying that you think you're biased, and that you feel sad in wishing that you could experience situations differently, maybe living in another part of the country, or the place you work is, I think you said, conservative. And so you feel sad about experiencing the bias, and also you said you wish you could really experience more equality. You mentioned something about authority as well, like kind of check against any authority, but especially like because there's been a lot of male authority around you, that you spent a lot of time in that attitude, and that you're sad about it and wishing it wasn't like that. And you have the impression that in your workplace that people who get more favorable attention or more power tend to kind of be, you could sort of classify them in certain ways, like being athletic or have sports background, or just kind of being tall and male, or representing kind of conventional gender roles, maybe, or family structures.
Yeah, yep, you got it. Thank you. I feel really heard. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm done.
Is that it? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess it's my turn. Let's see. I think I'll talk to Jessica.
Hi, thank you.
Hello. So one thing that comes to mind when we talk about patriarchy, what comes to mind for me, is the question of gender, as well as sex and gender with one of the associations I've heard with patriarchy is there's an insistence on more rigidity of gender roles. And I don't know how that works exactly, but that,
Oh, I'm sorry. I have to answer this phone call.
oh, this is your call. Okay.
I'll be back. Or you can go
All
on.
right.
Do you want to speak to someone else since?
Sure, I guess since we don't know how long her call might actually be.
She said it would just be a couple minutes.
I can go either way.
You want to, I guess the alternative is to wait, or I have an idea for.
I don't think we should wait. But I mean, I'm not the boss. This is
Yeah.
just my 2 cents.
What was your idea?
Actually, never mind. Feels a little too complicated.
Okay.
Can I just reflect that? It sounds like you said you could go either way as far as waiting or picking someone else.
Yeah. Maybe, how about if you step in and take over?
Okay. I'll
To
reflect.
be the listener. Okay, yeah. So just about, I've heard associated with patriarchy kind of some rigidity about gender roles and essentialism about gender roles. And I don't remember how that all fits together, but what I've gathered is that patriarchy, the concept, is associated with men also suffering from it, because then there isn't as much freedom to move outside of gender roles, or to be, if they're perceived as less masculine, then they suffer.
Yeah. So one of the things that you've heard patriarchy kind of just not defined as, but something you've heard attributed to patriarchy is like rigid gender roles, and that actually can be harmful to men, because then the ones who aren't as masculine according to like certain ideas of what it means to be masculine suffer, are treated poorly.
Yeah, that basically it affects everyone, and that it kind of limits the range of human presence when there's sort of a pressure built into the system to conform to one or the other of two gender roles.
So that you're saying that it hurts everyone when people are kind of basically given two options of like how to be, like what kind of personal qualities they're supposed to have, and when they don't kind of fit into one of those, that then like it hurts everyone if they're if the social norms make it so that that's like the only thing that's acceptable.
Yeah, I mean, not everybody may experience harm. I mean, the people who are thriving or experience themselves as thriving may not perceive it that way, but the potential is that not everyone's included in being accepted or fully themselves. Like that seems to be built into the system of patriarchy as I've heard it discussed.
Yeah. So you're saying not everyone necessarily suffers when there's rigid gender categorization? Like there's some people who are thriving, like maybe the people who just naturally fit the norms that are expected, but that it doesn't include everyone. It doesn't, there's not like space for people who don't fit those norms. So then those people won't be thriving.
Yeah, and then I would guess that even the people who might experience thriving are not as, they're missing out on other aspects of their own potential as well as other people.
Mm-hmm. So then also the people who do experience themselves as thriving, even in a rigid gender norms, are still missing out on maybe aspects of themselves, or maybe just like getting to connect with or know people who don't fit those norms, who are like hiding away or repressed or whatever.
Yeah, not everyone's gifts are able to develop.
Yeah, not everyone's personal gifts and contributions to society are able to be expressed or welcomed.
Yeah. So it sounds like I have the impression that some people, when they hear about patriarchy or kind of traditional gender roles, say, well, I mean, they're like that for a reason. And people, there's a tendency to naturally gravitate towards those roles. And I do acknowledge that there's big patterns throughout different cultures, but that there's still very few universals, and that in some smaller cultures, women's roles are really different than a lot of them sort of larger societies, bigger societies that we see.
Okay, so I think what you were just saying is that that there might be like trends of patterns that seem really common as far as gender roles, but that almost nothing or maybe nothing is universal, and that there's like small cultures in different places in the world where women's roles are really different from what might seem to be most like common or dominant.
Yeah, and I wish I could remember, but one of the books I was reading recently, the one that was titled Inferior, and it was how the author was tracing science, the history of science, kind of excluding women or bias towards women and what research was accepted or published, etc., or even the views of researchers about the sex differences. That one thing I remember, though I don't know why, is that men dominate not necessarily because of having increased strength or size. I think that's an assumption that seems like common sense, like, oh, well, men are bigger, stronger, louder in general, so then that's why they have more power. But the book was debunking that and unpacking other reasons why men have had more power in a lot of societies. And I wish I remembered what they were, because then it would be a more useful point. But
yeah, I'm hearing that you wish you could remember the details of this book you read that was kind of debunking the idea that men have had more power in certain societies because of being bigger and physically stronger, and that it offered other explanations for why that has been the case, and you wish you could remember what they were so it could be more useful.
Yeah.
That was 6.
Okay. Well, I guess that's it then. Thank you.
Okay. I guess I'll speak to Jessica since it was going to be you, and then you got a call.
Okay. I had to run off.
Yeah. We'll come back.
Okay.
So what do I want to talk about? I guess I want to say that, like, I think it's important, for me, it's important to recognize that, like, all these different terms, like patriarchy, feminism, sexism, like, they don't just mean one thing. Like, there's, even just in the United States, how many people are we? Like, over 300 million. Like, that's old. That number's old, I think. Like, everyone kind of has this idea of what it means. And sometimes, like, people might have, like, opposite ideas of what those things mean. And then I think people get confused because of that. Especially now that everyone's so, like, connected and talking all the time on, like, Twitter and Facebook and everything across the world. So, like, an example is, like, I saw this meme recently that was like, it was like a gamer, like video gamer meme. It was like feminism is giving the girl the better controller, like a controller to play a video game. And I saw it and I was thinking, that's not feminism. That's like chivalry, which ironically a lot of people would say is like the opposite of feminism. I'm not saying I agree or disagree. Like I don't even really play video games, so I don't know. I just noticed that was kind of different, like showed a different definition. And another way in which I think that people have different definitions is like it seems like these days a lot of like on the internet, a lot of what people call sexist is basically just like I wish I could think of an example. It's always better with an example. I guess what I see is like I think it's important to have empathy for women and to challenge assumptions about. Actually, I'll just pause there because I'm getting a little lost and I'm saying a lot, so I'll pause there.
You were saying that there's all the different terms: sexism, patriarchy. There were a couple more terms, I think. Was it matriarchy and?
Like patriarchy, feminism, sexism.
Yeah, they don't all mean the same thing, and people get confused. And you see on the internet where people there was a video gamer who thought that feminism was letting the girl do something, win or something.
Have a nice controller.
Have the nice controller, and you didn't think that was really sexism. It was more like chivalry, which could be seen as sexism, but you didn't think of it that way.
Well, it's just interesting to see the different definitions people have.
Yeah.
It changes, like it's always changing. Another example, just I guess my main thing is like, in the 70s, one of the famous feminist books was, I think came out in the 70s, it might have even been the late 60s. One of the famous feminist books was like The Feminine Mystique or something. Yeah, and that book was about the idea that women are like pure, magical, and like amazingly more in touch with their emotions and like alluring and like have all these special feminine qualities that not all women actually are like that. And then like women who aren't like that are treated as like less than women and then like therefore like less than human. And it's weird because now I see that almost like making a comeback under the name of feminism. Like now online, like people post things about like women being this or that or the other thing, and it actually, like that's what sexism is saying like a woman is like one certain thing rather than a human with all sorts of different capacities, like all sorts of possible qualities. Or like saying a man is like one certain thing instead of a human with all sort of potential qualities that they could have. To me, that seems more like a useful way to talk about sexism.
Yeah, you were talking about the book that came out in the 70s that was pretty popular among feminists called The Feminine Mystique. And it sort of made women into these mythical, magical creatures with these special qualities. And it sort of put them in a little box, I guess. And women are just as varied as men in their qualities.
Well, the book was talking about how it was kind of challenging that assumption. So yeah, thank you. I feel heard.
Okay. I guess I'll talk to you, Edwin.
Okay, listening.
Yeah, these are all real interesting to me. I think what Megan was saying about kindness and qualities usually associated with being feminine aren't really feminine at all. And I agree with that. I think both men and women, those are positive qualities to have. And I would also say that I think being able to defend yourself is not a masculine or a feminine thing. Both sexes should be able to defend themselves when they're in danger. You might not always have that stronger person around to help you out, so it's a good thing to know, especially if you want to feel free about running out at any time of night, coming back home at any time of night.
So you were agreeing with Megan and saying that men and women should have sort of a kindness to them as well as be able to defend themselves. So they're not masculine or feminine. They're just something everyone should have, be able to be. Yes.
And I think in the cultures where women are at the mercy of gangs of men, it's kind of dangerous for them. Like in India, I know there's a group of women that carry around big red poles to beat men up with that they see bothering other women. I forget what they're called. It's kind of a funny name. And then when Laura Logan, the reporter, was in Egypt when they were having riots, she was literally almost torn apart by a gang of men, and some women saved her. So those are the bad sides of having too much of a delineation, I suppose, of your culture, and putting too much restriction on how you're supposed to behave can lead to some pretty violent situations.
So there's situations where men were attacking women and women had to defend themselves. Egypt, India, and I don't think I quite got got it.
Oh, in India, there's a movement.
That the women were defending other women. Yeah.
Yeah, they have these big long poles, and when they see a gang of men, or usually it's a gang of men trying to bother women, they'll start attacking them with the poles.
Okay, so the women defend other women, and they've got these poles, and they'll protect the other women.
Yes. And I think that kind of violence is probably common, but because of the society's roles of men and women are too strictly defined, and it leads to a lot of unhappiness and violence sometimes.
Okay, because when men and women have very strict roles, that it creates a violence.
Sometimes.
Sometimes it can cause violence, and so yeah.
That's all I have to say right now.
Okay. Thank you. Then let's see, who hasn't spoken? I think Patricia, would you listen? I think you just had listened once. Okay. You're muted. I might be able to unmute you from here.
Okay, I got it.
There you go. Found it. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, it made some notes, and one of them was Megan had talked about nothing is neutral, and I would agree with that. That when I'm at the empathy tent, we do mediation between the sides, and people would come up and say, "Oh, you're neutral." I say, "I'm not neutral. I'm a strong advocate for empathy. I'm very standing up for the empathic kind of way of being." So I would. So I agree that there's nothing that's really neutral per se. That it's not something. It is. Everything is something. It is a position.
So one thing you noted during the discussion tonight was something that Megan said about there being no real neutrality, and you agree with that. And it's been interesting to you because when you're at the empathy tent, people come up to you and say you're neutral, and you know better than that. You say to them, "No, I'm a strong advocate for empathy," and it seems that that causes, that's an awareness you have of the
Yeah,
difference.
exactly. Yeah. And the other is, it's like everybody has different, I think it's come up several times that there's different meaning. We have different meanings attached to different words, different experiences. And there doesn't seem to be any shortcut versus to for dialogue. So what we're doing here, I see, is a way to sort of hash those out, what those meanings are. And it's a very time-consuming process, but I think, if we don't do it, that it just leads to, all kinds of problems. So it's something that we have to go through as a society. If we can increase this dialogue, especially, have some basic rules, everybody gets equal time, everyone gets heard, that helps us to understand each other and the meanings that are attached, because there's no real shortcut that I know of for doing that.
So it's a bit of a laborious process. There's no shortcut to investigating the meanings of these words and having viable discussion with others about them, and just really trying to and now I'm paraphrasing, but
Sure.
but it seems that there has to be, your opinion is that there has to be this work
Yeah.
is involved, and
Mhm.
and there's no way, we just have to accept it and kind of move through it.
And when I'm at the tent and I say, hey, my approach is empathic, there are some tools or ways, and the empathy circle is one. So I say, we'll sit down, we'll have a dialogue. I've got my point of view, you've got yours. If there's conflict, that's fine. We can learn from it. We need sort of some way of sort of navigating that everyone leaves like with the sense of sense of connection, sense of understanding, some mutual, maybe shared direction.
So when you're in the empathy tent, you actually don't just sit there and empathize with them, but you share some of your own views, and but you still have empathy for theirs. It's sort of this learning experience, and for both you and the other person, perhaps. And
Well, I try to ground the word. There's a word, empathy, right? So part of the grounding, I ground it in the experience that we're doing right now. So there is a structural, physiological grounding of an experience where we're sitting here talking with each other, hearing each other, and there's a felt sense that happens in this. So I kind of ground the word in this experience.
you give them the experience of empathy. It's a visceral, now they've experienced it as you're defining it, and it seems like that's a gift you feel maybe you're giving to them.
Yeah, it's not so much a gift, but just the reality. It's just expressing, articulating my understanding, and maybe we can have some shared understanding, out of that. But even then, it's really hard. I mean, I do like family empathy circles. We go for, like 3 or 4 hours, and there's still more conflict to kind of work through. It's kind of like, Johann Galtung, who started the peace and conflict studies in the university. He says, peace is resolving conflict with empathy, nonviolence, and creativity, and it's a never-ending task. So I think there's a never-ending task. So we need some tools for doing this never-ending sort of, integration and conflict resolution.
So you're seeing it as just an ongoing process. There's no end to it. The gentleman you quoted said that there needs to be creativity, empathy, and nonviolence all wrapped up into that together, and it needs to be done over and over and over again to make peace, to keep peace.
Yeah, and it's hard. Yeah, it's not easy.
It's not easy. Yeah.
Yeah, so I feel heard. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. I guess David.
Okay, I'm listening.
Okay.
I'm
Gotcha.
listening.
I decided to stay on because this was kind of too cool to leave.
We got you hooked.
I'll prepare more tomorrow, I guess. But I don't know what I want to say. I'm listening intently. It's very interesting. I guess I feel I don't know what I want to say. I guess I'm still seeing my own experiences, which have been these people that happen to be men have I've created this stereotype, and yeah, I don't know where I'm going with this. I think I'm just in a state of questioning right now. It's interesting to listen to this because I don't want to be one of those angry quote unquote feminist women, but I guess I kind of am, and I guess I'm feeling some shame about that, or some regret, or something, sadness. It's just like my last share, kind of. I just feel sadness, but at the same time I still feel kind of angry and demoralized and disappointed. So
Okay. You said that you were just going to stick around just for a little bit, but you got a little taste of this and you wanted to stick around a little bit longer, and that you weren't really sure where to go next, but that um, that you've seen some terms go around, and it seems like, that you might be fulfilling a stereotype, and you're kind of, you don't feel great about that, but that you're like, whatever, I'm that stereotype, I guess, and you're just working through that sort of stuff.
yeah, and it's interesting because right now I'm reading I just finished today Gandhi's autobiography, The Story of My Experiments with the Truth, and he was like an amazing man, and I just, and I'm inspired by him, and at the same time I know that, I don't know, maybe it's like the luck of the draw. I for some reason got like the skewed end of the probability curve with like the totalitarian people in my life being just happened to be men, and I feel like maybe that's colored my view for so long now, and keeps coloring it because I'm still in these situations where it feels like, I don't know if it's true, there is no neutral position here, but it just feels like I'm at a what do you call it? It's a weakness. It's considered to be a like I'm viewed through their lens with all these stereotypes on me. One of them being that I don't count it as much, or I'm not as good as them. So anyway. That's a
Okay,
lot.
you began by saying that that you've been reading a book by Gandhi, and that you feel like that he was a very inspirational and great man, and that perhaps, and it seems that maybe you've got like a bad luck at the draw on having unsavory experiences with what you consider to be unsavory totalitarian men, and so it seems like, you know, it's like a mixed bag of feelings, and that due to your experience, that has shaded your perspective on the world and men in general. And it seems the men that you're around seem to judge you as well, as far as things like your opinion doesn't count as much, etc.
Yeah, thank you. I really feel heard. That I think that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Is Lauren out of commission? I was going to pick her, but I could pick Megan.
Well, Lauren, are you there? You're muted.
You're muted and there's no video feed, Lauren. Are you there?
Okay, yeah, I had to plug in my charger. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
All right. So, listening to some of this, like I said, it's not my favorite subject. And I think part of one reason why I don't like the subject is because there's only so far you can go before you sound like you're biased. And you can get pigeonholed into an ideological corner and people can contradict you because the reality is very complicated.
So one reason you don't like talking about this subject is there's only so far you can go with it before you're inevitably seen as biased and you kind of get painted into an ideological corner, whether you like it or not. It just ends up happening that way.
And then when you end up in a position like that, it's easy to be contradicted.
Right. People can contradict you when you're in that position.
Yeah. There's a story, or actually it's part of history, that kind of comes to mind. And I think, I mentioned that I feel like things have to be discussed with this is the nature of power and the differences between men and women. And this is more about the nature of power. And this has to do with the story of Alexander the Great. And at one point, he was ruler of all the known world, and he died at a fairly early age. And as he was dying, they didn't have a clear line of succession about who was to take power. And when they asked him, like, who is going to take your place when you go, that he just laughed and said, "It goes to the strong," and then he died.
And so what did he say?
He laughed whenever they asked him who was to take his place, and he said, "It will go to the strongest." And
To the strongest.
Yes, and then he died. You can just
So, yeah, that you're kind of focusing on one of the things that needs to be discussed, which is power. And there's a story about how when Alexander the Great was dying and they kept asking him who is going to succeed him, and he just laughed and said, "The strongest," and then he died.
Yes. And from what I understand, there was a whole very dramatic sequences of events after he died, of everyone fighting for his power because to the strongest, right? And I mean, they were like in one faction, I think it was like the leader of his generals versus like there's some women in his family too that ended up getting support for them, and there was like tons of backstabbing, people sleeping with each other. It was just crazy. And it's kind of hard to see a rhyme or reason for the way things went down. other than it was just a contest. And the reason I bring that up, especially to the people who might, the women or their male allies that might want to talk about the evils of patriarchy, as far as power is concerned, I think if you want it, go and get it. You know, it's like, good luck with that. You know, like me personally, I don't want a lot of power. It seems like it's not worth it. But I think a lot of men do think it's worth it. A lot of people do. And as far as who's in charge, I think I could go on and on about biology or whatever, of course. And then again, I'll get painted to the corner and say that I'm, you know, my scope is limited. I just think it's an open contest. And I think the results speak for themselves. Whether or not the system is rigged or not, people can change that. So I'm kind of, with this particular subject, I'm out of it. I'm like, it's to the strongest. Good luck with that.
So then kind of the example you're giving with the story is that after he died, there was kind of a lot of upheaval and chaos and drama happening with people vying for power. And it kind of gives a vivid picture of the dynamics that happen with power. And you yourself don't really want any part of that. You're thinking if people want power, go and do that, you know, go get it, go fight for it if you want to. But, you know, because they find it's worth it. And for you, you don't see it as worth it. So you just step back pretty much. And then looking at who might be the ones who tend to succeed more. You don't want to get painted into a corner. You just kind of reference biology, like there's a lot more there you could go into, but you're not going to do that right now. But just, again, look at the results kind of speaking for themselves in terms of how it all plays out.
Yeah. So that's kind of where I stand with that. You know, sometimes I see leaders as foolish people. You know, like, I mean, I think there's people that want power, and then there's people that really want to change the world, you know, and there might be people that want to change the world, but once they get power, they get addicted to the power. And then I think there's people that perhaps really wanted the power, but once they got the power, they really just wanted to change the world. I think there's a lot of, is my time up? Okay. And I think there's lots of different ways of looking at it. So I just kind of, you know, gender is one thing, but as far as discussion of power, I'd like to sum it up like it's complicated, and generally whoever who can get it gets it, and good luck with that. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
You're just kind of underscoring your power, that you just, if people want to go for it, have at it. And they, in a way, you think maybe some of them might be actually kind of foolish, and maybe they don't even know what they're going for. What they're, once they get there, they might find they wanted to change the world, but instead they're getting caught up in the power, or vice versa. So you really just think, well, go ahead. That's for them.
I feel heard. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, so it's 8:48, so that'll be our last reflective round, and we'll go ahead and switch to a kind of go around of feedback from each person. So do you want to